Where Winds Meet began development in late 2019 by a small, passionate team at Everstone Studios, consisting of about a dozen developers. They had a clear goal: to create an open-world RPG inspired by wuxia culture, a Chinese genre that blends martial arts with philosophy and a very specific aesthetic narrative. The studio faced the challenge of doing something unprecedented, as there were no direct references or robust precedents in games that united this cultural niche with modern open-world RPG mechanics. This pursuit of authenticity from the beginning gave a very personal and passionate tone to the development, as if they were telling a story that was dear and original to them, without shortcuts or easy cliches. A fundamental aspect for the creation of the game was the immense historical and cultural research done by the team. They visited places like Kaifeng, one of the regions present in the game, consulted museums, and analyzed cultural relics to ensure that the recreated universe was as faithful as possible to 10th century China, the period of the 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms. Without using 3D scanners for modeling, they relied on thousands of photos taken to base the game's environments. This zeal for detail extended to ancient paintings and classic murals, which served as inspiration for the composition of the scenes, reflecting the importance of interpersonal relationships in the wuxia genre. This obsession with authenticity was also reflected in the sound design and soundtrack. The audio team sought out ancient scores and Chinese folk songs to assemble a soundtrack that matched the historical period and was culturally respectful. In addition, combat sounds were created manually, such as the use of cabbage stalks and branches to recreate the sounds of blows, which added a very realistic sensory layer to the game. Naturally, this combination of sound research with visuals and combat brought a sense of immersion rarely seen in games of the genre. The original release of the game in China was planned for June 2024, but it was postponed so that more content could be included, which denotes the care the studio took in delivering a complete and polished experience. The reception during the launch was extremely positive, with more than 3 million downloads in a few days, and players reacting strongly to the narrative, even showing intense emotion, such as tears in the most impactful parts of the story. This, to me, is a very clear indication that the team managed to go beyond the gameplay to tell a human and captivating story, something that is not always common in games of this size. Another aspect that I personally find interesting is how the game combines open-world mechanics inspired by major contemporary titles, but with a strong and unique identity. Based on wuxia, both in aesthetics and narrative, the fact that it was developed for modern platforms such as PS5, PC, and also mobile devices with temporary exclusivity on PlayStation, shows the ambition to reach a global audience, but without losing the Oriental cultural DNA. The global team's approach to making the game accessible and relevant to the Western audience while maintaining the wuxia essence seems intelligent to me and a great example of how games can build cultural bridges while respecting their roots. The story of Where Winds Meet is set in 10th century China, during the turbulent period known as the 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms, shortly after the fall of the Tang dynasty. This historical setting is one of the most captivating aspects for those who enjoy deep narratives, as it offers a backdrop of intense political conflict, intrigue, and epic battles that shape the destiny of the regions. The player takes on the role of a young swordmaster who seeks to discover his true identity and unravel the mysteries surrounding his past, which creates a strong personal connection with the protagonist's journey. The plot is not simply a linear narrative, but a tangle of stories integrated into an open world to explore, including large cities, wilderness areas, small villages, and underground landscapes. This dispersed approach allows the player to encounter varied stories and characters while exploring freely, giving the feeling of a living and constantly moving universe. This structure also provides moments that can deeply move, making the player not just a spectator, but a true participant in the story. The plot is not simply a linear narrative, but a tangle of stories integrated into an open world with more than 20 kilometers to explore, including large cities, wilderness areas, small villages, and underground landscapes. This dispersed approach allows the player to encounter varied stories and characters while exploring freely, giving the feeling of a living and constantly moving universe. This structure also provides moments that can deeply move, making the player not just a spectator, but a true participant in the story. The main narrative is complemented by seasonal events and expanded regional stories, such as those that occur in the regions of Qinghai and Kaifeng, which further deepen the protagonist's journey. These interval expansions promise to add layers to the story, introducing new characters, moral dilemmas, alliances, and enemies. This format pleases me because it allows the story to never stand still and for the game to remain fresh and surprising over time, something that rarely happens in games of this scale and complexity. Another fascinating point is how the game presents contrast within the cities, such as Kaifeng, where the luxury of Fanlu Golden Street stands side by side with slums and extreme poverty, and the grand palaces coexist with ghostly markets. This duality not only gives realism to the environment, but offers a rich social narrative, showing the countless facets of life in ancient China. For me, this brings depth and complexity to the story, making the world seem genuinely alive and pulsating, far from that sense of empty scenery that many open-world games have. At the heart of the gameplay is the combat system, which brings a mixture of speed, technique, and diversity. The style is clearly inspired by Souls-like, which means that the confrontations are challenging and require mastery of the mechanics to defeat the enemies, especially powerful bosses. What personally caught my attention is the enormous variety of weapons available, which go far beyond the traditional swords and spears and include unusual items such as umbrellas and fans, the latter with magical attacks and specific animations made with motion capture of real martial artists. A characteristic that differentiates Where Winds Meet from other action RPGs is the possibility of switching between weapons during combat, which allows you to create combos and strategies based on the weapon's style. In addition, the game incorporates mystical abilities and martial arts techniques such as acupuncture and tai chi, which adds an additional tactical layer to the gameplay. Also notable is the system that allows the player to create their own styles, such as the drunken style, which combines dance animations with fire attacks, a touch of personality that enriches the immersion and offers a lot of freedom in the way you play. In addition to the focus on combat, Where Winds Meet strongly bets on integration with MMO mechanics. The game offers several social interactions, including friend lists, guilds, cooperative modes, and even PvP elements with hunts for infringing players, making the world alive and dynamic. This multiplayer facet is not restricted to online combat, but permeates the entire environment, including complex interactions with characters, who have artificial intelligence for conversations and can even be taken to fights as allies. An innovation that provides the game with a rare level of social depth. Another aspect that draws attention is the diversity of activities parallel to combat and exploration. Where Winds Meet brings mini-games that range from sumo fights to shadow theater shows, which adds variety to the gameplay and offers more relaxed moments for the player to accumulate rewards and deepen cultural contact with the Wuxia universe. These parallel activities make the game more complete and give a sense of a living and breathing world, something that I consider essential to stand out in an MRP or open-world RPG currently. In my opinion, Where Winds Meet manages to harmonize very well the dynamism of the combats with the immersion and complexity of a Wuxia MMO world. The mixture of cinematic movements with a varied weapon system and special attacks creates a gameplay that is not only fun, but also artistically impressive. In addition, the depth in social interactions and the existence of minigames expand the experience, preventing the game from being just about combat, but a true cultural and fun immersion. Where Winds Meet stands out for its robust technical performance and the ambition it carries in its structure, especially considering that it is an open-world RPG with detailed graphics and complex mechanics. The game was developed with Everstone's own engine, called Messiah Engine, which gives greater control over the optimization and implementation of the game's visual and physical characteristics. This translates into a fluid experience mainly on PlayStation 5 and on PCs that meet the recommended requirements, maintaining good stability even in dense and action-packed areas. Speaking of requirements, Where Winds Meet is not an experience for modest machines, especially on PC. The recommended configuration requires a Core i7-10700 or Ryzen 7 3700X processor, along with 32 GB of RAM, which draws attention because it deviates from the industry average that usually recommends 16 GB for similar titles. This indicates that the game makes intensive use of memory to manage its dynamic open world, with weather effects, day and night cycles, and a voluminous amount of data loaded in real time. Obviously, this configuration requires a larger investment, but it reflects the game's ambition to deliver a cutting-edge visual and technical experience. Storage is another important point to ensure good performance. At least 100 GB of free space are required on an SSD, and the developers emphasize that installation on an SSD drive is practically mandatory to ensure fast loading times and avoid stuttering when moving around the world. With a huge world with several cities, in addition to the detailed visual qualities of the game, the use of SSD is a requirement that makes total sense and helps immersion, avoiding breaks in rhythm. This attention to technical details reveals a genuine care to ensure that the experience is as smooth as possible. On PlayStation 5, the optimization is at a high level, taking advantage of DualSense features, such as adaptive triggers and haptic feedback, in addition to exploring well the power of the hardware to maintain a high frame rate, 60 FPS, and resolution in 4K. The console experience is particularly appreciated by those who like the fluidity that the new generation hardware can deliver in games with elaborate graphics and fast combat. Personally, I see this as an important success to reach both the traditional console audience and fans of robust action RPGs. However, like any ambitious game, Where Winds Meet may require fine adjustments to run well on varied equipment. Some players report the need to reduce graphics settings to maintain fluidity on mid-range PCs, especially in scenes with many particles and weather effects. This behavior is understandable given the complexity of the game and, in my view, demonstrates transparency, since the developers did not choose to soften the game too much to run on all PCs, but rather deliver something visually impactful and that values the most powerful hardware. The overall performance of Where Winds Meet impresses with its technological ambition and the quality with which it delivers a dense experience, with a large and living world, fluid combat alternatives, and varied social and cultural elements. For those who like open-world RPGs with great immersion and technical challenge, the game presents itself as a solid promise. My personal impression is that the title, despite requiring powerful hardware, rewards the player with a performance that values each visual and mechanical aspect of the game, offering an experience that can be both contemplative and explosive, depending on the user's playstyle. For those who love the wuxia theme and seek an immersive experience in the culture and aesthetics of this Chinese martial tradition, Where Winds Meet offers a full plate. The game tries not only to reproduce fighting movements, but to incorporate the philosophy and beauty of wuxia with weapons that are extensions of the character's personality, fluid combats, and a world that overflows with life and details that refer to works like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. For this audience, the launch is a moment of great expectation, and the initial investment can be rewarded. However, it is important to keep in mind that the game is free to play and uses a monetization model based on cosmetics and season passes, which guarantees free access to the main content, but may bother players who prefer premium games without microtransactions. In addition, the game should still receive several updates and adjustments after the launch, including seasonal expansions that promise to renew the content and experience every 3 months. For those who like to follow the evolution of the game calmly, it may be worth waiting for these updates for a more complete experience. In terms of gameplay, the influence of other major open-world titles is notorious, and some critics mention that the game may overwhelm the player with missions and distractions, being more suitable for those who have time to dedicate themselves and like to explore the minutiae of the world and secondary stories. Therefore, for casual players, this may not be the best launch to invest in immediately, as the learning curve and the amount of active content may seem overwhelming at the beginning. From a personal point of view, I think Where Winds Meet has the potential to be one of the surprises of the year for those who enjoy games that deviate from the Western standard and bring new cultures and narrative styles to the forefront. If you are a fan of games like Sekiro and like the feeling of freedom in open maps, it may be a valuable bet at launch, especially if you take advantage of the invitation to cooperative multiplayer, which adds another layer of fun. On the other hand, those who prefer more polished titles with fewer bugs on day one may even consider waiting a few months. As the game will be constantly updated, waiting will allow for a more refined version and probably with more content available, in addition to eventual improvements in the balancing of combat and missions. This strategy is useful for those who do not need the immediate launch, but want to ensure that their experience is the best possible.